Stop scrolling. Because this story starts with a trespass, ends with a cash register, and proves that sometimes the best revenge is a receipt. I woke up one Saturday morning to the thok-thok of tennis balls and the squeal of sneakers on fresh paint. The sound was coming from behind my barn, on land I owned, paid taxes on, and had kept empty for years. So I walked out with coffee in hand and saw a full HOA-grade tennis court where my grass used to be. There were nets, benches, scoreboards, and a laminated rules sign with my neighbor's association logo smiling back at me. No notice, no easement, no permission, just people playing like they'd always been there. When I asked who approved this, a woman in white tennis skirts laughed and said, "The HOA, it's community property." That sentence lit a fuse, because I had the deed in my safe, survey markers still in the ground, and a very clear boundary line they had crossed. I could have called the cops. I could have lawyered up. But then I noticed something important. They loved this court. They needed it. So instead of shutting it down, I did something that made them furious, confused, and eventually broke. I pulled out a folding table, printed a sign, and turned their game into a meter. By the end of that week, every serve cost money, every set added up, and the HOA realized they'd built their favorite amenity on the wrong side of a very expensive line. Stick around, because the fees weren't the best part. Watching them try to explain this to their own board was... I stood there watching rallies continue while I measured the space with my eyes, remembering the years I'd mowed, seeded, and maintained that exact strip of land without a single thank you. The HOA had skipped every conversation and went straight to assumptions, betting I wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight. They were wrong on both counts, but they wouldn't learn that lesson for weeks. What they didn't know yet was that every laugh, every missed call, and every complaint would soon come with a price tag. I was done being the quiet neighbor, and I wasn't about to spend months in court when their own enthusiasm could do the work for me. That decision changed everything, including how they looked at me from that morning forward. And once money entered the picture, politeness vanished, tempers flared, and the truth about who really owned what could no longer be ignored by anyone standing on that court pretending it was theirs. The clock had started, and I was holding the timer with a smile they didn't like at all. Yet, Monday morning, I showed up with a clipboard, a stack of printed tickets, and a hand-painted sign staked right at the entrance of the court. It read, "Private land, $100 per game, pay before play." I didn't block access. I didn't yell. I just sat in a folding chair like a parking attendant, sipping coffee and waiting. The first group of players froze when they saw me. One guy laughed nervously and said, "You're joking, right?" I handed him a ticket and pointed to the survey stakes still visible near the baseline. Word traveled fast. Within an hour, the HOA president stormed over, red-faced and carrying a binder thicker than my patience. She claimed they had verbal approval from someone years ago. I asked who. She couldn't say. I asked for paperwork. She flipped pages and found none. I calmly explained that until they could produce proof, every match on that court was a paid event. Her jaw tightened. She threatened fines, access restrictions, and legal action. I smiled and told her the rate doubled for tournaments. They tried to shut it down by calling security. Security took one look at the deed copy I'd laminated and said it was a civil matter. They tried to rope off the court. I removed the tape. They tried to intimidate me with letters. I taped the letters to my sign, highlighting the part where they admitted building the court last year. That admission alone was worth more than any argument. By Wednesday, players were lining up anyway. They loved the court too much to stop. They paid in cash Venmo, even checks made out with angry memos. I logged every game, every hour, every cent. Parents paid so their kids could practice. Retirees paid so they could keep their morning ritual. Some complained loudly while handing over money. Others whispered apologies like I was running a confessional booth. The HOA board called an emergency meeting and invited me. I brought my ledger. They demanded I stop collecting fees. I asked them to stop trespassing. Silence followed. One board member suggested they'd just absorb the cost. Temporarily, I slid the numbers across the table. In 3 days, they already owed more than a lawyer's retainer. The tension cracked friendships. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Players argued over who should pay. Suddenly, the community amenity had an invoice attached, and everyone wanted someone else to handle it. I didn't need to raise my voice or threaten anyone. The court did all the work for me, game by game, serve by serve, and the more they played, the deeper the hole got. They still believed they could outweight me. They were wrong. By the second week, the mood around the tennis court had completely changed. What used to be laughter and friendly competition now felt like a toll road nobody wanted to admit. They were driving on. Players arrived early, scanning for my folding chair like fugitives looking for a patrol car. Some tried sneaking in at dawn. I started showing up earlier. Others tried staying late. I brought a lantern. The court lights made it easy to count games, and my ledger kept growing thicker. The HOA sent a certified letter demanding I cease unlawful fee collection. I sent one back, attaching copies of the deed, the survey, and photos of the construction equipment on my land. I also included an invoice, $7,400 and counting. They didn't reply. Instead, they posted a notice claiming the court was temporarily closed for maintenance. That lasted exactly one afternoon. By evening, the nets were back up and people were playing again, telling themselves they'd deal with the consequences later. Later arrived quickly. I began posting daily totals on a whiteboard. Day 8, 9,200, that's when panic set in. Neighbors started arguing in the parking lot. Some accused the board of negligence. Others blamed me for being difficult. I reminded them that fences, like deeds, exist for a reason. One man tried to rally players to boycott the court. 2 hours later, he paid for his doubles match. The board finally offered a solution. They proposed a one-time goodwill payment of $2,000 if I sign an easement retroactively. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was insulting. I explained that goodwill doesn't start with bulldozers and assumptions. I told them the meter was still running and that any agreement would include restoration costs, back fees, and legal recording. Their faces told me they hadn't expected resistance to last this long. Behind the scenes, cracks widened. One board member resigned. Another sent me a private email apologizing and asking how to make it stop. I replied with a single sentence: remove the court or pay what you owe. Meanwhile, the total climbed past $12,000. Parents pulled kids from lessons. Couples argued mid-match about whose turn it was to pay. What once symbolized community now symbolized embarrassment. The irony was sharp. If they'd asked permission, I might have said yes for free. But they didn't ask. They took. And now every bounce of the ball echoed with that mistake. I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. The court had become a countdown clock, and everyone could hear it ticking. The HOA still thought they could negotiate from a position of strength. They were about to learn how quickly that strength disappears when the numbers stop being abstract and start being unavoidable. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon, right before a scheduled HOA charity tournament. Banners were already hung, sign-up sheets were full, and a local sponsor had printed flyers with the court's photo splashed across them. What they hadn't printed was my name or the bill. I showed up early, ledger under my arm, and updated the whiteboard one last time. Total owed, $18,600 tournament rate, $200 per game. The HOA president arrived moments later, heels clicking faster than usual. She asked me quietly this time to step aside and talk. Gone was the binder, gone were the threats. She said the board was prepared to resolve this amicably. I asked how. She said they'd vote that evening to approve payment and remove the court as soon as practical. I told her practical had already passed, and that payment came first. She hesitated, glancing at the players warming up. The donors arriving, the sponsor rep taking photos. An emergency board vote was called in the clubhouse. I was invited again. This time, no one raised their voice. The treasurer admitted they'd used reserve funds to build the court without verifying the boundary survey, assuming I'd never object. The words hung in the room like smoke. They asked if I'd accept a reduced total to move forward. I slid the ledger across the table and reminded them that every number represented a choice they'd made, not me. Outside, players waited, checking watches. The sponsor rep asked if the tournament was still happening. I said yes, as long as the landowner approved. That line did the damage. Within 30 minutes, the board voted unanimously to pay the full amount, cover removal costs, and issue a written apology to homeowners. They wired the money that same afternoon. I watched the confirmation email arrive before the first serve of the tournament. I let the games go on that day. I even waived the per-game fee, not out of kindness, but because the lesson had already landed. The court was quiet by Monday. Construction crews returned, this time to dismantle instead of build. Nets came down. Lines were scrubbed away. The grass beneath was pale and scarred, but it was mine again. Neighbors stopped by with awkward smiles and half-apologies. Some thanked me. Others avoided the topic altogether. The board mailed out a letter explaining the oversight and the financial hit. Assessments went up. People asked how it happened. The answer was simple. Someone assumed ownership didn't matter until it did. As for me, I deposited the money, reseeded the land, and kept the deed framed in my office. I didn't enjoy the conflict, but I didn't regret standing firm. Because once you let someone build on what's yours without asking, they'll keep building until you disappear entirely. And I wasn't going anywhere. Months passed, and the space where the tennis court once stood slowly returned to what it had always been meant to be. Quiet, open, and undeniably mine. New grass took hold. The scrape marks faded, but the story didn't fade inside the neighborhood. It turned into a cautionary tale told in lowered voices whenever a new project came up at HOA meetings. Surveys were ordered. Permissions were documented. Assumptions died quickly after that. I ran into the former HOA president at the grocery store one evening. She nodded, stiff but polite. We didn't talk about the court. We didn't need to. The outcome spoke for itself. The association paid, the land was restored, and the board rewrote its approval process from the ground up. What had cost them $18,600 in fees and thousands more in removal. Expenses saved future homeowners far more in avoided lawsuits. That wasn't my goal, but it was the result. Some neighbors still believe I was harsh. They say I could have stopped it sooner, handled it quietly, avoided the spectacle, maybe. But quiet solutions require respect on both sides. I wasn't given that courtesy. I was given bulldozers and laminated rules. Charging per game wasn't about greed. It was about forcing a conversation they refused to have any other way. The meter worked because it turned denial into urgency. The funniest part is that a year later, the HOA approached me properly about leasing the land for a garden. This time they brought surveys, contracts, and apologies. I listened. I declined. Not out of spite, but because trust takes longer to regrow than grass. They understood. That alone told me the lesson had stuck. Ownership isn't just lines on a map. It's the boundary where cooperation begins. When that boundary is ignored, conflict fills the gap. I didn't win because I was louder, or richer, or meaner. I won because I was right, and because I stayed consistent while everyone else scrambled. The court came and went, but the principle remained. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Never assume access means ownership, and never confuse silence with consent. Ask first. Document everything. And if someone builds on what's yours without permission, remember that patience can be more powerful than rage. Sometimes the smartest move isn't to shut things down immediately, but to let the truth add up. One undeniable number at a time. The land is quiet now. No bouncing balls, no scoreboards, just wind moving through grass that belongs to me again. And every time I look at it, I'm reminded that respect for boundaries isn't optional. It's foundational. The HOA learned that the hard way, and the neighborhood learned it with them.